A bobcat kitten stole a blanket and growled at everyone. But what happened next melted hearts. In a way no one could have expected. At first, it looked like a dangerous encounter, a wild animal lashing out. But when one woman followed its trail, she uncovered something so shocking, it turned fear into sympathy. This wasn't just a hungry animal. It was a desperate protector, guarding a secret that could change everything. But standing in the way was a powerful man, someone determined to destroy what the kitten fought to save. And when survival, truth, and danger collide, one choice will decide who wins and who loses everything. So the question is, was the bobcat kitten really a threat? Or the most unlikely hero anyone could imagine? Before we dive in, drop a quick hello in the comments. Maybe your name, maybe your city. Every reply reminds me this isn't just my voice, but our space. The morning sun cast long shadows across Caroline Hensley's front yard as she filled the water bowls for the recovering animals in her makeshift rehabilitation pen. The crisp mountain air of Aspen Ridge carried the sharp scent of pine needles, a familiar comfort that wrapped around her like an old friend. At 43, Caroline had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythms of her life as the town's only veterinarian, finding solace in the predictable routine that helped ease the ache of loss that had haunted her for the past 2 years. On her porch, railing lay David's old wool blanket, soft and worn from years of use. Her late husband had always carried it on his conservation hikes, claiming it was his lucky charm. Now it served as her morning companion during coffee breaks, a tangible reminder of happier times. The peaceful scene shattered in an instant. A blur of tawny fur shot across her yard. Moving with desperate speed, Caroline froze, her coffee mug halfway to her lips as she registered what she was seeing: a bobcat kitten, scraggly and thin, its golden eyes wild with determination. Before she could react, the creature leaped onto her porch, snatched David's blanket in its teeth, and bounded away. "Hey," Caroline called out, her heart racing. "Wait." The kitten paused at the edge of her yard, the blanket dragging beneath its small body. When Caroline took a step forward, the creature let out a growl that seemed too big for its tiny frame. Its matted fur stood on end, and those fierce eyes locked onto her with a mixture of fear and defiance that made her catch her breath. Mrs. Henderson from next door appeared at her fence, her gray hair in curlers. "Caroline, was that a wild animal I just saw?" Before Caroline could answer, other neighbors began gathering. Tom from across the street joined Mrs. Henderson, his morning paper forgotten in his hand. "That looked like a bobcat to me," he called out. "Awful close to the houses, don't you think?" Caroline raised her hands in a calming gesture. "It's just a kitten, folks, probably separated from its mother." She took another careful step toward the bobcat, but it growled again, backing away. With the blanket firmly clenched in its jaws, "A kitten today. But what about when it grows up?" The deep voice cut through the morning air like a knife. Ralph Cray stood at the edge of Caroline's property, his expensive boots planted firmly on the ground, thumbs hooked in his belt loops. His presence seemed to make the air heavier, more oppressive. "We've been seeing more and more predators coming down from the mountains. It's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt." Caroline felt her jaw tighten. "Ralph, it's clearly undernourished and scared. It's not a threat to anyone. Not yet." Cray responded, his pale eyes cold. "But we all know how these things go. First, it's a cute little kitten stealing blankets. Next thing you know, we've got full-grown cats taking down calves and threatening children." The neighbors murmured in agreement, and Caroline noticed how they seemed to gravitate toward Cray, as if his wealth and influence created its own gravitational pull. She turned her attention back to the bobcat kitten, which had taken advantage of the distraction to retreat further with its prize. Taking a deep breath, Caroline began to slowly approach the kitten again. "Easy there, little one," she murmured, keeping her voice soft and steady. "I just want to help." The kitten's response was immediate and fierce. It dropped into a crouch, still gripping the blanket, and let out a sound that was half hiss, half snarl. Its tiny body trembled with the effort, but there was no mistaking its message. "Come closer at your own risk." Caroline stopped, her heart pounding. In that moment of confrontation, she saw something in those golden eyes that struck her deeply. Not just fear or aggression, but a desperate determination that seemed somehow familiar. The kitten wasn't just being aggressive, it was protecting something, fighting for survival in the only way it knew how. "See that?" Cray's voice boomed from behind her. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. Vicious little thing. We'll need to take care of this before it becomes a real problem." Caroline turned to face him, standing her ground. "The only problem I see is jumping to conclusions without understanding the situation. That kitten needs help, not threats." The gathered neighbors shifted uncomfortably, caught between Caroline's compassion and Cray's authority. In the tense Silence, the sound of the blanket dragging across the ground drew everyone's attention. The Bobcat Kitten was making its final retreat, disappearing into the underbrush at the edge of Caroline's property with David's blanket trailing behind it. Like a surrender flag, Caroline watched it go, her chest tight with conflicting emotions. The loss of David's blanket stung sharply, but something about the kitten's desperate courage tugged at her heart. She realized she was trembling slightly, shaken by the encounter, but also strangely energized by it. The morning's peace had been irrevocably broken, replaced by a tension that hummed in the air like electricity before a storm. As her neighbors dispersed, their whispered conversations carrying words like dangerous and something must be done, Caroline stood alone in her yard, staring at the spot where the kitten had vanished. She couldn't shake the feeling that this morning's incident was more than just a random encounter. It was the beginning of something that would force her to confront not only the fears of her community, but the grief she'd been carefully containing. For the past 2 years, Caroline stood at her back porch, wringing her hands as she debated her next move. The stolen blanket, David's blanket, represented one of her last tangible connections to her late husband. But as a veterinarian, she knew that healthy bobcats rarely venture this close to human settlements unless desperate. The kitten's risky behavior suggested something was wrong. That beast needs to be dealt with. Ralph Cray's voice boomed from the road. The burly rancher had gathered a small crowd of concerned neighbors. First it's blankets, next it'll be after our pets or livestock. Can't let these predators get comfortable around humans. Caroline's jaw tightened. She'd known Ralph for years, and while he was quick to sound the alarm about wildlife threats, his solutions usually involved rifles and traps. The thought made her stomach turn. It's just a juvenile, she called back, keeping her voice steady. Probably scared and hungry. Let me assess the situation before we do anything drastic. Your call, Doc, Ralph replied, though his tone suggested he disagreed. But when it starts causing real trouble, don't say I didn't warn you. The small crowd dispersed, but their whispers carried on the mountain air. Caroline caught fragments about dangerous animals and irresponsible wildlife management. She knew how quickly fear could spread in a small town like Aspen Ridge. Taking a deep breath, Caroline retrieved her medical kit from the clinic attached to her house. Professional instinct told her to set a humane trap, but something held her back. The kitten's desperate grab for the blanket and fierce defense of it seemed almost purposeful. Following the trampled grass and scattered pine needles, Caroline tracked the kitten's path beyond her property line. The trail led to an old storage shed that had partially collapsed during last winter's heavy snows. Its weathered boards created a maze of shadows and hiding spots. Caroline approached cautiously, her boots crunching on fallen leaves. A low growl emanated from beneath the structure. Through a gap in the boards, she caught a glimpse of David's blanket, now pulled into a makeshift nest. Easy there, she murmured, crouching down to peer into the darkness. I'm not here to hurt you. The sight that greeted her made her heart skip a beat. The older kitten, the blanket thief, stood guard over to smaller siblings. They were tiny, probably only a few weeks old, their spotted fur matted and their small bodies trembling. The stolen blanket had been arranged around them for warmth and protection. Caroline sat back on her heels, understanding washing over her. The older kitten wasn't acting out of aggression. It was desperately trying to care for its family. Their mother was nowhere in sight, and given their condition, she likely hadn't been for some time. The protective older sibling watched her warily, muscles tense to defend its charges if necessary. But Caroline could see the exhaustion in its stance, the way its own ribs showed through its fur. It had risked everything to steal that blanket, driven by the most basic instinct to keep its siblings alive. Tears pricked at Caroline's eyes as she thought of David's blanket, now serving as a lifeline for these orphan creatures. Her husband had loved wildlife, spending countless hours documenting and protecting the animals that called these mountains home. She could almost hear his voice. Sometimes the things we lose find their way to where they're needed most. The young bobcats represented both a challenge and a responsibility. Their presence this close to town would continue to stir up controversy, but Caroline knew she couldn't ignore their plight. As both a veterinarian and someone who understood loss, she felt a deep connection to these small survivors. She watched as the older kitten adjusted the blanket around its siblings with gentle movements that contradicted its earlier ferocity. The little family had found refuge in this broken-down shed, creating their own kind of hope from whatever they could find, even a stranger's blanket. The discovery transformed Caroline's understanding of the situation. What had started as a simple case of a stolen blanket had revealed itself to be something far more complex and touching. These weren't dangerous predators threatening the town's safety. They were orphan youngsters, fighting to survive the only way they knew how. The news of the orphaned Bobcat Kitten spread through Aspen Ridge like wildfire. By sunset, the small mountain town was abuzz with conflicting opinions. Some residents expressed sympathy for the helpless creatures, while others voiced growing concerns about wild predators so close to their homes. Caroline sat in the back of the crowded town council chamber, her heart pounding as Ralph Cray commanded everyone's attention. He stood at the podium in his expensive leather boots and crisp western shirt, his weathered face set in stern lines. These aren't cute little house cats we're dealing with, Cray declared, his voice carrying authority gained from years of throwing his weight around. They're dangerous predators that threaten our livestock, our pets, and our children. Last year alone, I lost 12 calves to predators. That's money out of all our pockets, folks. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Caroline noticed several ranchers nodding, their faces grim. She watched as Cray paused for effect, his pale eyes scanning the room. We need to take decisive action, he continued. Clear out these predators before they multiply. It's simple economics. Our ranching community can't afford to feed these animals with our livestock. Caroline's hands trembled as she stood up. I'd like to speak, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. All eyes turned to her, and she forced herself to walk to the podium. Up close, she could see the cold calculation in Cray's eyes as he took his seat. These kittens are orphaned and desperate, she began. They're not a threat. They're survivors. I've already contacted the Wild Mountain Sanctuary. They're willing to take the kittens and rehabilitate them for release in a protected area, far from any ranching operations. And who's going to pay for that? Someone called out. Caroline lifted her chin. I will. I'll cover all costs associated with their capture and relocation. Cray's laugh cut through the room. That's not the point, Dr. Hensley. While you're playing nursemaid to these predators, they're learning that human areas are safe zones. They'll keep coming back, bringing more problems with them. There are humane solutions, Caroline insisted. We don't have to choose between our livelihoods and showing compassion. These animals are part of the natural balance that makes our mountain community special. The room grew tense. Caroline could feel the invisible line being drawn, dividing those who supported her from those who sided with Cray. Martha Wilson, who brought her elderly cat to Caroline every month, wouldn't meet her eyes. Tom Parker, whose ranch bordered Cray's, stared at her with open hostility. The law's clear, Cray said, standing again. When predators threaten livestock or human safety, we have the right to eliminate that threat. I move that we authorize immediate removal of these animals, by whatever means necessary. Caroline's voice rose with determination. These kittens haven't threatened anyone. The older one only took my blanket because it was trying to protect its siblings. They're scared, hungry, and alone. The vote stands at 7-3 in favor of removal. The council chairman announced after a tense discussion, property owners have the right to deal with predators as they see fit. Caroline felt the weight of stares as she walked out of the chamber. People who had trusted her with their beloved pets for years now stepped aside, creating a path of isolation. But as she reached her truck, she stood straighter. The memory of those tiny kittens, huddled together under her husband's blanket, strengthened her resolve. Dr. Hensley, Cray's voice carried across the parking lot. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Some things are just the way they are out here in ranch country. She turned to face him, noting the handful of ranchers standing behind him. Like a show of force. No, Mr. Cray, sometimes things need to change. Those kittens deserve a chance, and I'm going to make sure they get one. His face hardened. You're new money in an old town, doctor. Don't forget that. And you're not the only one who knows how to fight for what matters, Caroline replied, climbing into her truck. As she drove home, she could see Cray's truck in her rearview mirror, a dark reminder that she had just made a powerful enemy. But for the first time since her husband's death, she felt truly alive, ready to stand up for something bigger than herself. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town hall steps as Caroline emerged from the contentious council meeting. Her shoulders felt heavy, but her spine remained straight despite Cray's harsh words still ringing in her ears. The crisp mountain air helped clear her mind, though it couldn't entirely wash away the sting of seeing so many familiar faces turn cold at her defense of the Bobcat Kittens. Caroline, got a minute? She turned to find Luis Ortega standing nearby, his ranger uniform neat as always, though his expression carried the same weathered concern she remembered from years past. He'd been a constant presence in the background of town meetings, but tonight was the first time he'd approached her directly since her husband's passing, of course. Luis, she replied, grateful for a friendly face. He gestured toward a woman, bent beneath an old spruce tree, away from the dispersing crowd. That took guts in there, he said, as they sat down. Standing up to Cray isn't easy. Your husband would have been proud. Caroline's throat tightened at the mention of her late husband. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. Those kittens need help. But the way everyone looked at me in there. You're doing exactly what needs to be done, Luis said firmly. His sun-darkened face creased with determination. I've been watching the wildlife patterns in this area for 20 years. Every predator we lose throws something else out of balance. Your husband understood that better than anyone. You worked with him on several conservation projects, didn't you? Luis nodded, his dark eyes distant with memory. Some of the best work I've ever been part of. He had a way of seeing the bigger picture, understanding how everything connects. That's what Cray and his crowd don't get, or don't want to get. A cool breeze rustled through the spruce needles above them as Caroline absorbed his words. The sanctuary I mentioned in there, it's real, but getting the kittens there safely, handling all the permits, she shook her head. I wouldn't even know where to start. That's where I come in, Luis said, leaning forward slightly. I've got contacts at 3 different wildlife sanctuaries within reasonable distance. More importantly, I know exactly which permits we need and how to fast-track them. He paused, watching her face carefully. If you want my help, that is. Caroline felt something warm bloom in her chest. Hope, she realized. For the first time since finding the kittens, she didn't feel completely alone in this fight. I'd be grateful for any help you can offer. Then let's make a plan, Luis said, pulling out a small notebook. First thing tomorrow, I'll contact Sarah at Blue Ridge Sanctuary. She owes me a favor, and they've got excellent facilities for rehabilitating young predators. As they discussed logistics, Caroline noticed Cray emerge from the town hall, surrounded by his usual group of supporters. He spotted them, and his face darkened, but Luis seemed unfazed. He's already trying to push through emergency permits for predator control, Luis mentioned quietly. Claims the bobcats are an immediate threat to livestock. It's all exaggerated, but he knows how to work people up. I've noticed, Caroline replied, watching as Cray gestured dramatically to his audience. He's convinced half the town I'm putting their children at risk. That's his playbook, fear first, facts later. But we've got something he doesn't. Luis's expression softened. We've got truth on our side, and people who understand the real value of maintaining nature's balance. The sun had nearly set now, painting the mountains in deep purple shadows. Caroline felt stronger than she had all day, knowing she had an ally who not only supported her cause but brought real expertise to the table. Thank you, Luis, she said quietly. This means more than you know. He smiled, the gesture warming his usually serious features. Your husband was a good friend and a better man, helping you protect what he valued. What we both value, it's the least I can do. As they finished outlining their initial steps, Caroline watched more townspeople leaving the hall. Some whispered and pointed in their direction, while others deliberately looked away. The town was choosing sides, that much was clear. But with Luis's support and knowledge backing her up, Caroline felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The Bobcat Kittens deserved a chance at survival, and she was determined to give it to them. No matter how much Cray tried to stand in their way, Luis stood, tucking his notebook away. I'll start making calls first thing tomorrow. We'll need to move fast, but we'll do this right. He hesitated, then added, You're not alone in this fight anymore, Caroline. Remember that. She nodded, feeling a surge of renewed determination. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least now she had someone walking it with her who understood exactly what was at stake. Caroline sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers and her laptop. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the environmental reports and land surveys she gathered. What had started as simple research into predator control regulations had led her down an unexpected path. This can't be right, she muttered, cross-referencing another document. Her finger traced the boundary lines on an old map of Aspen Ridge's protected wilderness areas. Then she compared it to a recent satellite image on her screen. The differences were subtle but unmistakable. She reached for her phone and dialed Luis's number. Can you come over? I found something you need to see. 20 minutes later, Luis stood beside her, frowning at the evidence spread across her table. Look at these grazing permits, Caroline said, pointing to a series of documents. Every time Cray has pushed for predator control, he's followed up by extending his cattle range. But here's the thing. These new grazing areas overlap with protected wilderness zones. Luis leaned in closer, his expression growing grave. He's using the predator threat as cover. He said slowly, remove the natural predators, claim the land is now safe for grazing, and gradually push the boundaries. Exactly. Caroline pulled up another file on her laptop. I checked the environmental impact studies. The areas where he's eliminated predators have seen massive changes in the local ecosystem. Without bobcats and other predators controlling the rabbit population, the vegetation patterns are shifting. He's literally changing the landscape to suit his needs. This explains why he's so aggressive about these kittens, Louise said, straightening up. It's not about 3 orphan bobcats at all, no. It's about setting a precedent. Caroline stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that had always been her home. If he can convince the town to eliminate predators for safety reasons, there's nothing stopping him from expanding his ranch wherever he wants. Louise joined her at the window. The land preservation laws are clear, but they depend on maintaining the natural balance. Without predators, the entire ecosystem changes, Caroline finished. And once that happens, the protection status becomes harder to defend. She turned back to the table and picked up a particularly telling document. Look at this pattern. In the last 5 years, he systematically targeted areas with predator populations. First with mountain lions to the north, then wolves in the Eastern Valley. Each time, he's used public safety as his argument. And each time, his ranch has expanded into the newly safe zones, Louise added grimly. It's clever. Most people don't understand the connection between predators and land preservation. Caroline gathered the most important papers into a folder. My husband would have seen through this immediately. He always said that protecting predators was about more than just the animals themselves. Tom had a way of seeing the bigger picture, Louise agreed softly. He understood that everything in nature is connected. So what do we do with this information? Caroline asked, tapping the folder. It's not just about saving 3 bobcat kittens anymore. This is about protecting the entire wilderness area. Louise thought for a moment. We need to be strategic. Cray has a lot of support in town, and people are already nervous about the bobcats. If we can prove that his predator control campaign is really about land grabbing, we might be able to stop him, Caroline finished. But we'll need more than just papers and maps. We need to show people what's really at stake. I can help with that, Louise said. Part of my job is documenting environmental changes. I've got years of photography showing how the landscape has altered, where predators have been removed. Visual evidence tends to make a stronger impression than statistics. Caroline nodded, feeling both overwhelmed by the scope of what they discovered and determined to act. We need to move carefully. Cray's been building this plan for years. If we're going to expose it, we have to do it right. Agreed, Louise said. For now, let's focus on getting those kittens to safety. That'll buy us time to build our case about the bigger picture. Caroline gathered the documents into a secure folder, her mind racing with the implications of their discovery. What had started as a simple act of compassion for 3 orphan bobcat kittens had unveiled a calculated scheme to exploit the wilderness. The stakes had grown far beyond what she'd imagined, but somehow that only strengthened her resolve. She looked at the mountain landscape through her window, thinking about how her late husband had fought to protect it. Now it was her turn to continue that fight, not just for 3 small lives, but for the entire ecosystem they represented. Ralph Cray's boots thundered down the town hall steps as he stormed out of the emergency council meeting. His face was flushed with anger, and several concerned citizens hurried to keep pace with him. That woman's gone too far, he growled, pulling out his phone. Spreading lies about my business? I won't stand for it. His fingers jabbed at the keypad as he dialed the local newspaper editor. Within hours, Cray's influence spread through Aspen Ridge like wildfire. Headlines questioned Caroline's judgment, suggesting her emotional attachment to the bobcat kittens clouded her professional expertise. Anonymous quotes painted her as unstable, still grieving her husband and projecting her feelings onto dangerous predators. Meanwhile, Caroline and Louise prepared for their first attempt to safely capture the kittens. They gathered specialized equipment in her veterinary clinic, gentle traps, transport cages lined with soft blankets, and sedatives calibrated for young bobcats. We'll need to move fast, Louise said, checking his watch. The sanctuary's ready to receive them, but we have to time this perfectly. Caroline nodded, her heart racing with both excitement and anxiety. They've been accepting small amounts of food from me. The oldest one, he's still wary, but he doesn't growl as much now. As they loaded their equipment into Luce's Ranger truck, Caroline noticed Ralph Cray's pickup cruising slowly past her clinic. He made no attempt to hide his glare. The shed where the kittens had made their temporary home stood in the growing dusk. Caroline approached first, speaking in soft, soothing tones. She placed fresh food near the entrance, just as she had been doing for days. Easy now, she whispered, kneeling at a safe distance. Nobody's going to hurt you. The oldest kitten emerged cautiously, followed by his siblings. Their movements were less frantic than before. Hunger and Caroline's patient kindness had gradually worn down their fear. The smallest one even paused to look at her before eating, its tiny face showing a hint of trust. Luis maintained his position several yards back, ready with the transport equipment. Everything was going according to plan until a sharp metallic snap pierced the air. A pain yell followed, and the kittens scattered in terror. Caroline's heart stopped as she realized what had happened. Someone had placed an illegal steel trap near the shed. No, she cried, rushing forward. The oldest kitten had been caught, its paw clamped in the cruel device. Blood matted its fur as it thrashed in panic. Luis was already on his radio, calling for backup. "This is deliberate sabotage," he said grimly. "These traps were banned years ago. Someone planted it here to interfere with our rescue." Caroline focused on the injured kitten, drawing on all her veterinary experience to stay calm. "I need my medical kit from the truck," she said steadily. "And bring me the sedative. We'll have to treat him here before we can move him." As Luis jogged back to the vehicle, Caroline spoke softly to the frightened animal. "I know you're scared," she murmured, "but I promise I'll help you." The kitten's eyes locked with hers, pain and fear evident in its gaze. A rustling in the underbrush revealed the other two kittens hadn't gone far. They crouched nearby, watching their siblings' predicament. Their loyalty touched Caroline deeply. They refused to abandon their brother. Despite their terror, Luis returned with the supplies, and together they worked to free and treat the injured kitten. Caroline's skilled hands moved efficiently, administering the sedative and carefully extracting the paw from the trap. The wound was serious, but treatable. "This could have killed him," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "These traps are illegal for a reason. I've documented everything," Luis assured her, photographing the trap and the scene. "Cray's gone too far this time. This isn't just harassment anymore. It's criminal." As they finally managed to secure all three kittens in the transport carriers, Caroline heard the distant sound of more vehicles approaching. She knew this was just the beginning of a bigger battle. Cray had shown how far he was willing to go to protect his interests, but she was equally determined to protect these innocent lives and the wilderness they represented. The injured kitten stirred slightly in its carrier, sedated but stable. Caroline checked its breathing one more time before they loaded it carefully into Luce's truck. Despite the sabotage, they had succeeded in their immediate goal, but the cost had been far too high. Luce's face was grim as he started the engine. "We need to get them to safety now," he said. "But tomorrow, we're taking this evidence to the authorities. Cray's not getting away with this." Caroline nodded, her hand resting on the carrier containing the injured kitten. The little family of bobcats had survived their first move, but she knew Cray wouldn't stop here. The real fight was just beginning. The forest hung silent and still in the late afternoon light. Caroline and Luis moved carefully through the underbrush, each carrying a specialized transport cage. Inside, two of the bobcat kittens huddled together, their golden eyes wide with fear. The eldest sibling prowled nearby, refusing to be caught but unwilling to abandon its family. "Almost there," Luis whispered, checking his GPS. "The sanctuary transport is waiting just beyond that ridge." Caroline nodded, her heart heavy with both hope and anxiety. The past few hours had been exhausting. Coaxing the younger kittens into the cages had taken all their patience and skill. She still bore fresh scratches on her arms from their terrified struggles. A twig snapped somewhere behind them. Luis froze mid-step. "Did you hear that?" Before Caroline could respond, a familiar voice cut through the trees like a knife. Well, looks like I caught myself some trespassers." Ralph Cray emerged from behind a thick pine, rifle held casually in his hands. His face was twisted with barely contained rage, though his voice remained eerily calm. "Ralph," Caroline said steadily, despite her racing heart, "this is protected land. We have permits for." "Permits?" Cray spat the word. "You think your little papers matter out here?" He raised the rifle, pointing it first at Luis, then at Caroline. "You've been causing me nothing but trouble, spreading lies about my business." Luis slowly set down his cage, raising his hands. "Let's talk about this rationally, Ralph. Nobody needs to get hurt." "Rational?" Cray's laugh was harsh. "I've been rational. I've tried doing things the proper way. But you people," he took a step closer, his boots crushing fallen leaves. "You don't understand progress. Sometimes problems need permanent solutions." Caroline felt her blood run cold as she realized what he meant. The rifle's barrel now pointed directly at the cages containing the helpless kittens. "Ralph, please," she pleaded, instinctively moving to shield the cages with her body. "They're just babies. They haven't hurt anyone." "Move aside, Caroline," Cray ordered, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The eldest bobcat kitten, which had been shadowing them unseen, suddenly emerged from the undergrowth. Its matted fur was bristled, golden eyes fixed on Cray with laser focus. Despite its small size, the creature radiated fierce protective energy. Cray noticed the movement and swung his rifle toward the new threat. Perfect. The whole family can. He never finished the sentence. With explosive speed, the Bobcat Kitten launched itself through the air, directly at Cray's face, its claws extended, catching sunlight like tiny daggers. Cray screamed, stumbling backward as he tried to bring the rifle to bear. But the kitten was too quick, too close. Its attack wasn't meant to kill. It was protecting its family the only way it knew how. Louis seized the moment. He lunged forward, tackling Cray around the waist. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the air as both men went down. They grappled in the dirt and leaves, Louis fighting to control the weapon while Cray thrashed and cursed. The Bobcat Kitten bounded away as quickly as it had attacked, disappearing back into the brush. Caroline rushed to help Louis, kicking the rifle far from Cray's reach. Once it came loose, it's over. Ralph, Louis said firmly, pinning the struggling rancher. The authorities are already on their way. We knew you might try something like this. Cray went limp, his fight draining away as the reality of his situation sank in. Blood trickled from shallow scratches on his face where the kitten's claws had struck. Caroline returned to the cages, checking on the younger kittens. They were frightened but unharmed. In the trees above, she caught a glimpse of golden eyes, watching, their fierce protector, still standing guard. Louise kept Cray subdued until park rangers arrived minutes later, alerted by the gunshot. As they led the rancher away in handcuffs, Caroline heard him muttering about progress and necessity. But his words held no more power to frighten her. She turned her attention back to the cages and their precious cargo. The eldest kitten had reappeared, keeping a cautious distance but clearly unwilling to let its siblings out of sight. In its eyes, Caroline saw not the dangerous predator Cray had feared, but a reflection of the most basic truth, the fierce, protective love of family. The forest fell into an eerie quiet after the rangers led Cray away. Caroline's hands trembled as she checked the cages one more time, her fingers lingering on the metal latches. The younger kittens huddled together, their small bodies pressed against the back of their enclosures. Their fear was palpable, and it stirred something deep within her. Louis approached slowly, still catching his breath from the struggle. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but concerned. Caroline nodded, though tears had begun to well in her eyes. She paused, struggling to find the words. "I keep thinking about Tom, about how he would have handled this." The mention of her late husband's name brought a fresh wave of emotion. Tom had always been the fighter, the one who stood up against injustice without hesitation. She'd been the cautious one, preferring to work quietly behind the scenes. "He would be proud of you," Louise said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Tom always said you had more strength than you knew." The eldest kitten appeared again, moving closer than before, its golden eyes fixed on Caroline with an intensity that made her catch her breath. There was something familiar in that gaze, something she recognized from her own reflection in the mirror during those first devastating months. After Tom's death, "Look at how it protects them," she whispered, watching as the kitten positioned itself between them and its caged siblings. "It doesn't matter how scared it is or how overwhelming the odds. It just keeps fighting." Louis nodded, understanding dawning on his face. "Like someone else I know." Caroline felt something shift inside her, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. She thought about the blanket the kitten had stolen, Tom's blanket. At first, she'd seen only the loss, the violation of a precious memory. But now she understood. The kitten had taken it for the same reason she'd kept it, to protect what remained of family. "I've been so focused on what I've lost," she said, her voice growing stronger. "But Tom, he wouldn't want me to just survive. He'd want me to fight for what's right, just like he did." The elder kitten moved closer still, its previous aggression replaced by a cautious curiosity. Caroline saw her own journey reflected in its actions, the progression from fear to fierce protection, from loss to purpose. "This isn't just about saving these kittens anymore, is it?" Louis asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Caroline shook her head. "It's about everything Cray represents, the greed, the disregard for balance, the willingness to destroy anything that stands in the way of profit." She wiped her eyes, determination replacing tears. "Tom fought against that kind of thinking his whole life. And now it's my turn." The eldest kitten sat down, maintaining its vigilant watch but seemingly more at ease. Caroline realized they had reached a kind of understanding. To protectors, both scarred by loss but made stronger by it. "We need to get them to safety," she said, new resolve steady in her voice. "And then we need to make sure Cray's schemes are exposed. All of them." Louis smiled, recognizing the transformation in his friend. Tom always said you were the strongest person he knew. I think he was right. Caroline stood straighter, her fear replaced by clarity of purpose. The path ahead would not be easy. Cray still had allies and change never came without resistance. But she was no longer fighting just for herself, or even just for these kittens. She was fighting for everything Tom had believed in, everything she believed in. The eldest kitten chirped softly to its siblings, a sound of reassurance that seemed to calm their frightened movements in the cages. Caroline felt her heart swell with understanding. Like this brave little creature, she would protect what needed protecting. She would stand against those who would destroy for profit. She would honor Tom's memory not through quiet grief, but through determined action. We should get moving, she said, her voice steady and sure. These little ones have waited long enough for their new home. As they gathered their equipment, Caroline cast one last look at the eldest kitten. It met her gaze with that same fierce intensity, and she nodded in acknowledgement. They were both survivors, both protectors, both fighting for something larger than themselves. In that moment, she felt Tom's presence more strongly than she had since his death, not as a source of sorrow, but as a source of strength. The Aspen Ridge Town Hall buzzed with tension as residents filed in for the emergency council meeting. Caroline clutched her folder of evidence, her knuckles wide against the manila surface. Louis stood beside her, a steady presence in his ranger uniform. Ready? He whispered. Caroline nodded, though her heart hammered in her chest. The council members sat at their elevated desk, their faces serious under the fluorescent lights. Ralph Cray lounged in the front row, his customary arrogance on full display. Mayor Sarah Bennett called the meeting to order, her gavel echoing through the packed room. We're here to address serious allegations regarding protected wilderness areas and recent events involving local wildlife, she announced, her voice crisp and formal. Caroline stepped forward. When called, laying out her documents on the podium, her hands trembled slightly as she began. Council members, neighbors, I stand before you with evidence of systematic violation of protected wilderness areas and deliberate manipulation of our town's safety concerns. She projected the first satellite image onto the screen behind her. Red lines marked Cray's gradual encroachment onto protected land. Over the past 3 years, Mr. Cray has deliberately pushed his grazing boundaries beyond legal limits, destroying natural habitats in the process. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cray shifted in his seat, his confidence wavering for the first time. But that's not all, Caroline continued, her voice growing stronger. Mr. Cray's campaign against predators isn't about public safety, it's about eliminating natural checks on his illegal expansion. Louis stepped forward, adding his professional authority to Caroline's claims. As a wildlife ranger, I can confirm these findings. The documentation shows systematic elimination of predator populations to facilitate illegal grazing. Caroline clicked through more images, tampered fences, falsified permits, documented instances of wildlife interference. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer blow against Cray's reputation. Just last week, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger, Mr. Cray attempted to sabotage our legal efforts to relocate 3 orphan Bobcat kittens. When that failed, he resorted to physical threats. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Cray leaped to his feet. This is slander, he shouted, his face red with rage. Mayor Bennett banged her gavel. Mr. Cray, you'll have your turn to respond. Caroline pressed on, revealing photographs of the sabotaged equipment and Luce's official report of the confrontation. This isn't about 3 kittens anymore, she declared. It's about protecting our wilderness from exploitation, about preserving the balance that makes Aspen Ridge special. As she spoke, she saw faces in the crowd changing, shock turning to understanding, then to anger. People who had once backed Cray now stared at him with undisguised contempt. When Cray finally took the podium to defend himself, his usual swagger had vanished. His explanations sounded hollow, his justifications weak against the weight of evidence. Council members who had once courted his favor now pressed him with hard questions. These allegations are very serious, Mr. Cray, Councilwoman Peters said, her voice sharp. We have satellite imagery, documentation, and witness testimony. How do you explain this? Cray's response was a jumble of excuses and deflections. Each attempt to justify his actions only emphasized his guilt. The council's deliberation was brief. Mayor Bennett's voice rang with authority as she announced their decision. Based on the evidence presented, this council will immediately revoke Mr. Cray's grazing permits pending full investigation. All expansion into protected areas must cease immediately. She turned to Caroline. Furthermore, we formally authorize the transfer of the Bobcat kittens to the Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary. With our thanks to Dr. Hensley for bringing these matters to light. The room erupted in applause. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes as Neighbors who had once shunned her came forward to offer support. Even those who had feared the bobcats now understood the bigger picture. How one man's greed had manipulated their concerns. Cray stormed out of the hall, his carefully constructed image in shambles. His power had always rested on appearance. An influence exposed to the light of truth. It crumbled like a house of cards. "You did it," Louise said quietly, standing beside Caroline as they watched Cray's retreat. David would be so proud. Caroline thought of the 3 kittens, safe in temporary housing until their transfer. Like them, she had faced threat and uncertainty, but found strength in standing up for what was right. "We did it," she corrected him, including all those who had helped bring the truth to light. Sometimes justice just needs people willing to speak up. The council chamber gradually emptied, but the impact of the evening's revelations would ripple through Aspen Ridge for years to come. Cray's downfall wasn't marked by violence or dramatic confrontation. Instead, truth and persistence had stripped away his power, revealing the hollow core of his influence. Mayor Bennett approached Caroline as the crowd thinned. "Dr. Hensley, thank you for your courage in bringing this forward. Sometimes it takes one person willing to stand up to remind us all of our responsibilities to this community and its wilderness." Caroline nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her. The battle had been won not with force, but with truth and moral courage, just as David would have wanted. The early morning mist clung to the mountains as Caroline and Louise prepared for the transfer. 3 specially designed carriers sat ready in the back of Luce's Ranger truck, each lined with soft blankets and equipped with water dispensers. "Everything set," Louise said, checking his clipboard one final time. "The sanctuary team is expecting us in for hours." Caroline nodded, her heart both heavy and light as she approached the temporary enclosure where the 3 bobcat siblings had been staying. The eldest, the one who had first stolen David's blanket, watched her with amber eyes that no longer held hostility. "Ready for your new home," she whispered, kneeling beside the enclosure. The kitten blinked slowly, a sign of trust that brought tears to her eyes. Louise joined her, his presence steady and reassuring. "They've come so far," he observed, "especially this little fighter." Together, they began the delicate process of moving each kitten into its carrier. The youngest went easily enough, already accustomed to human handling after weeks of care. But when Caroline approached the eldest with David's old wool blanket, she held her breath. To her amazement, the kitten didn't resist. Instead, it allowed her to wrap the blanket around it, even leaning into the familiar fabric as she carefully lifted it into the carrier. "Would you look at that?" Louise whispered, watching the transformation from stealing it in desperation to accepting it as comfort. Caroline secured the carrier door, touching it gently. Sometimes what starts as survival becomes something more. The drive to Mountain Haven Wildlife Sanctuary took them through winding mountain roads. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Caroline rode shotgun, frequently turning to check on their precious cargo. The kittens remained calm, the eldest curled tightly in David's blanket. "David would have loved this," she said softly, watching the morning light paint the mountains gold. "He always said nature finds its way to balance if we just give it a chance." Louise glanced at her, his expression warm. "He was right, and you helped restore that balance." Caroline, the sanctuary sprawled across protected wilderness, a haven where injured and orphaned wildlife could heal and, when possible, return to the wild. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead veterinarian, met them at the entrance. "Welcome to Mountain Haven," she greeted them, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "We've prepared the rehabilitation enclosure exactly as discussed." As they carefully unloaded the carriers, Caroline found herself sharing the kitten's story, not just their rescue, but how they had helped her find her own path to healing. "The eldest one," she explained, as they transferred the carriers to the quarantine area, "taught me something about fierce love, about fighting for family." The rehabilitation enclosure was perfect, spacious, secure, with natural features that would help the kittens develop their wild instincts. Caroline watched as Dr. Chen and her team expertly released each kitten, monitoring their reactions. The eldest emerged last, still wrapped in David's blanket, to everyone's surprise. It didn't bolt for cover. Instead, it settled on a rocky outcrop, arranged the blanket with careful paws, and surveyed its new domain with quiet dignity. "That's remarkable," Dr. Chen observed. "Usually, they reject anything associated with human contact once released." "That blanket," Caroline explained, her voice thick with emotion, "it became more than just warmth. It became safety, family, survival." Louise stepped closer, his shoulder brushing hers. "Like someone else I know who found strength in protecting what matters." They stayed for hours, watching the kittens explore their new home. The siblings stayed close together, the eldest always watching over the younger ones. Gradually, they began to play, testing their surroundings with growing confidence. They'll do well here, Dr. Chen assured them. We'll monitor them closely, but based on what I'm seeing, they have excellent survival instincts. When they're ready, we'll begin the process of returning them to protected wilderness. Caroline nodded, feeling a deep sense of completion. That's all I wanted for them, a chance to live free and wild, but protected. As the afternoon light softened, it was time to leave. Caroline approached the enclosure one last time. The eldest kitten paused in its play, meeting her gaze with that same slow blink. Thank you, she whispered, touching the mesh gently for helping me remember what it means to fight for something precious. Walking back to the truck with Louise, Caroline felt lighter than she had in years. Grief would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her future. You know, Louise said as they reached the parking area, there's a new conservation project starting up. The sanctuary needs local veterinary support for ongoing wildlife rehabilitation. Caroline smiled, understanding the invitation in his words. Sounds like something I'd be interested in. I was hoping you'd say that, he replied, his eyes crinkling with warmth. Maybe we could discuss it over dinner? Looking back at the sanctuary, Caroline saw the 3 Bobcat siblings huddled together on their rocky perch, David's blanket still part of their nest. The sight filled her heart with peace. What had begun in loss and fear had transformed into something beautiful, survival, healing, and the promise of new beginnings. I'd like that, she said, turning back to Louise. I'd like that very much. The drive home was filled with comfortable silence and shared smiles, the mountain roads familiar, but somehow fresh with possibility. Caroline thought about the strange path that had led her here. How a desperate bobcat kitten stealing a blanket had opened her heart to healing, to purpose, and perhaps even to love again. Life, she realized, was like the wilderness itself. Fierce and tender, full of endings that became beginnings, and always finding its way back to balance. If even one moment stayed with you, hit subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story written gently for the heart.